low of 5 degrees. Tomorrow, another mixture of sunshine and showers with a high of 21. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. It is 3 minutes past 8 here on LBC. We're about to embark on the 8th of our Battle for Prime Minister interviews. The 9th will be coming up at 9 with Michael Gove. If you'd like to watch us, you can do so on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk, the Facebook page or the Twitter feed. Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary, is with us, Conservative MP for South West Surrey. Good to see you. You're looking remarkably calm, if I may say so, because this is such a sort of roller coaster ride, isn't it, the leadership campaign?
Well, maybe it's your Zen-like presence, Ian, that's just relaxing me. But no, it's a completely surreal thing doing a leadership campaign. I've obviously never done one before. And it takes you a while to get into the swing of it. But I found, actually, if you just follow a rule, which is just to say what you think and stick to that, you avoid a lot of elephant traps and things get easier. But it's different to being Foreign Secretary, because Foreign Secretary, you have to be incredibly careful about everything you say, because whatever it is you want to say, it's going to upset one country or another. But doing this, you've just got to show a bit of yourself. Otherwise, people don't get to know the person who wants to be Prime Minister. When did you first decide that you might like to run for the leadership? I don't mean in the last few weeks, but you've been in Parliament since 2005. When did you think, well, I think I could do this? Well, it's going to make me sound like an ambitious little sod, but I think when I arrived in Parliament, I had a little corner of me that thought one day I'd like to do this. And then I think what happens is when you're in Parliament, you're hearing all the shouting, the bear pit of Prime Minister's questions. Some people decide, actually, this is not for me. And some people, they have ministerial experience, and I've had some pretty tough jobs in the last few years. I've actually been in the cabinet 9 years now, and so I've got a chance to actually see it close up, the highs, the lows, and so it's partly whether you fancy doing the job, and it's also partly whether you think you can bring something different to the job. And I think what's motivated me on this occasion is that I do think that we've got ourselves into a terrible place on Brexit, and I want to bring something different to try and solve the problem. Well, let's start off. Just so people know, it'll be questions from me for the first half an hour, then we'll have questions from our listeners. You say we've got ourselves into a terrible mess over Brexit. Well, I mean, you've played a pretty leading part in the cabinet over the last few years. Why are you the man to get us out of it? Well, I have been in the cabinet, and I've had a ringside view of it, but I haven't been personally responsible for the big decisions. Well, you're Foreign Secretary. Yeah, but the Brexit negotiations essentially have been done by the Prime Minister, and I thought it's my job as Foreign Secretary for the last year, but also as Health Secretary before that, to support her loyally. And there have been times when we haven't agreed, and that's what happens around a cabinet table. You have your debates, and I've always believed in total frankness in private and total loyalty in public. But when we had those situations, why didn't I resign? Might be one of your questions, if there were things. I wasn't going to ask that, but why didn't you resign? You have asked it now. Well, because I wanted the Prime Minister's deal to get through. I think we would have been in a better situation now. We'd have left the EU. Now, it's not a perfect deal, and personally, I didn't like the backstop. And personally, I didn't want the backstop to be put to Parliament because I didn't think it would get through Parliament. But in the end, the Prime Minister made that decision. I supported her, and I wanted to help her get it through because I think it would have been better for us as a country. But now that hasn't happened. We've got a different way. We've got to find a different way, and I want to help do that. But you said that you've disagreed with her on a number of things. I'm not going to ask you to go through every single one, but you can presumably tell us the main area of disagreement with her strategy. Well, my main reservation about her deal was this thing called the Northern Irish backstop, because it basically committed us to staying in the customs union, which is the thing where the tariffs are set for products that are being imported into a country. Would have stayed in the EU's customs union until the EU gave us permission to leave. And I felt uncomfortable with that because, Brexit is about bringing back sovereignty to the UK. And I also didn't think it would get through Parliament. But, these are very difficult judgments. That's what Prime Ministers have to do. And I recognise the Prime Minister had to make her own call on this. And having made that call, I wanted to do everything I could to make a success of her decision.
So what is it that you want to put to the EU that Theresa May has not done?
Well, we have a lot of discussions. In fact, I'd say for the last month it's been non-stop discussions on how we get out of the Brexit crisis. But I think we should be having more discussions about who can get us out of the Brexit crisis, and to
we'll
actually
come
strike
on to that.
No, let me just
answer that question.
No, but this is going to answer your how as well.
All right.
To get a deal, first of all, you've got to be someone that the other side will talk to, because no one does a deal with someone they don't trust. Secondly, you've got to be someone who doesn't blink. And thirdly, you've got to be someone who's prepared to walk away. And I think that I fit the bill as far as that's concerned. And much the best way to leave, if we possibly could, would be with a deal. Although in the end, I've always said if the only way to leave is without a deal, then I would do that. And I think it is possible, having talked to many European leaders, to find a different deal that works for us and works for them.
But you haven't told me what you would do that Theresa May hasn't done.
I would find a deal that does not have this Northern Irish backstop that traps us in the customs union.
That's in the withdrawal agreement, which they say is not up for renegotiation.
Well, they say it's not up for renegotiation, but they also want a solution. I think it will be very challenging to get that changed before the 31st of October. But I think if you arrive as a new Prime Minister, you've got a reasonable solution that addresses their concerns about the Irish border, which are also our concerns, incidentally, and also maintains the integrity of the single market. I think they'll listen. In fact, I know they'll listen, because they want to find a solution to this, but it's about approaching them in the right way.
Well, when you say they'll listen, I think you did have a conversation with Angela Merkel on when you were at the Normandy commemorations on the anniversary of D-Day. But there are 27 countries involved. They've always said that all the negotiations have to go through the European Commission. Well, between now and the end of October, there isn't really a European Commission. The new commissioners aren't sworn in until November the 1st. The Commission basically goes on holiday for the whole of August. How confident can you be that you can even talk to anybody in that time?
Well, we have to recognise that it's going to be challenging, and that's why I think the danger of a 31st of October get out at any cost deadline is that you will end up tripping out without a deal. But when I talk to European leaders and European foreign ministers, I believe, and I get the very strong sense, that if the UK came forward with alternative proposals, they would take them very seriously, because they want to solve this. But if we were the week before that 31st of October deadline and we nearly got a deal but not quite, I'm not going to walk off, because I think that it's much in our better interests to leave with a deal that is not so disruptive to British businesses.
How do you judge, though, the point when you actually can't get the deal that you want? What's the crucial issue that will make you think, well, actually, we've done our best, but we can't do this anymore?
Well, I'll tell you. So I think one of the reasons that Theresa May's negotiations stopped is because the Europeans stopped believing that the British government and Theresa May could deliver the British Parliament. They thought whatever concessions we make won't make any difference. So I've said that in my negotiating team, I would have the DUP, the ERG, which are the Brexit purists in the Conservative Party, Scottish and Welsh Tories, so that we always think about the union when we're doing this. And no proposal we make would be a proposal that couldn't get through the British Parliament. And that will give any proposals we make on, for example, technology solutions or whatever it is, credibility. And that is the very first step. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend this is going to be easy. But I've been a negotiator all my life. I've set up and run my own business. I've done very big and complex negotiations in government. And is there a deal to be done there? Yes, there is. And I don't think we should get pessimistic about this. And, if we're going to unite the country, finding a better deal is the only way to do it.
But you accept that the withdrawal agreement as is dead as a dodo?
It absolutely will not get through Parliament. Yes, it's dead as it is.
I mean, Rory Stewart obviously didn't think so. That was his main platform, that he would try and get it through again, which I have to say I found rather perplexing, given that it hasn't got through over the last 3 occasions. But in terms of actual changes to the agreement, apart from the backstop, is it just the backstop, or are there other aspects that you want to change? The 39 billion, for example, is that up for renegotiation in your new deal?
I think if we want to get a deal, we need to pare down the requests we're making to change the withdrawal agreement to the minimum necessary in order to maximise the chances of getting a deal. And I think the backstop is the main issue. I think lots of people have issues with elements of the financial package and other details. But my reading of Parliament is that the vast majority of MPs, it's the backstop that is the core issue.
And you say that you would be willing to continue for days or maybe weeks after October the 31st. Weeks could mean a lot of things. It could mean up to 52 weeks. Can you quantify that more?
If we haven't left the EU, very soon, and certainly 52 weeks' time would not be very soon, then people are going to get very frustrated and angry. And I think we'll find out pretty quickly when we come up with our proposals, which are the proposals that I think do have support in Parliament for a technology solution.
And have you got definite proposals ready to go?
I think there are very clear proposals ready. I think the difficulty is that at the moment there's some scepticism on the EU side, but I think when we put those proposals forward, we will know pretty quickly whether they are willing to negotiate. And I think if you give them the kind of Prime Minister that they think they can do business with, who's going to be fair, who's going to be tough, going to get what is necessary for the country, but do it in a fair way, then my reading of them is they do want to solve this. And what I'm saying is, let's not be defeatist. Let's think about how we can get through this, because otherwise the risk is, if you have no trust, there'll be no negotiation, no deal, and if we have an election, maybe no Brexit. And that would be a big risk for the country.
Final question on this, because I do want to move on to other issues. This actually came from a tweet from someone called Alex earlier. He said, why does Jeremy Hunt condemn Boris Johnson's plan for no deal, while also saying that if we leave without a deal, then so be it? There is a conflict there, isn't there?
No. What I've said, and I've been completely clear about this, if the only way to leave the EU is without a deal, then with a heavy heart, I would do that, because in the end, the democratic risk...
Even though you know that there would be massive economic consequences from that?
Yes, that's why it would only be with a heavy heart, and I wouldn't do it if there was a prospect of a better deal that could get through. But that's my point to Boris last night in the debate. It was, if you've got a deal there, you haven't quite inked it on the paper, but it's nearly there, but you get to the 31st of October, I'm not going to destroy those farming businesses, which will be wiped out by 40% tariffs on lamb.
Do you not think this is why people say, well, Jeremy Hunt, nice guy, probably could negotiate better than maybe has been done before, but he's Theresa May in trousers, that he will keep going, he will keep thinking that there is a deal to be done, and we'll never get to that point of actually leaving?
No, because Jeremy Hunt has been an entrepreneur for pretty much his entire working life before he went into politics. He's done negotiations inside government, very difficult negotiations, like the junior doctor's contract, like the BBC licence fee, like negotiating an extra 20 billion for the NHS. And the big difference is that the deal that I want to negotiate will not have the backstop in it as it is now. And that's why it will have a reasonable chance, a good chance, I would say, of getting through Parliament. And that is a very, very big difference to the approach that we've been taking to date.
You mentioned the BBC licence fee. That's as if you knew what I was going to ask you next, which of course you didn't. Well, let's talk about that, because this is kind of down to you, isn't it? This was your policy. You made the BBC have to make this decision.
No.
When you were Culture Secretary?
No, I think that decision... from memory, because this was a long time ago, was the licence fee after the one that I negotiated. The BBC licence fee that I negotiated was in 2010, and it was in the autumn of 2010, and we had a discussion then about free TV licences for the over 75s, but I don't think it was incorporated into the BBC's charter until much later.
Lord Foster told us in an interview, he said, "I discovered that George Osborne and Jeremy Hunt were planning this move to make the BBC responsible for what is a welfare policy."
Well, my understanding is, and as I say, this was 9 years ago, that this wasn't in the licence fee that I negotiated. Remember, I stopped being Culture Secretary in 2012, and there have been licence fees negotiated since then. I think it was in the spending review of 2015 that this was put in.
But do you support the fact that the BBC have essentially been given the job that in any normal circumstances it would be a government's job to decide on a particular aspect of welfare policy after all Gordon Brown brought it in?
Well, that was the deal that the BBC signed, but we as Conservatives in our manifesto said we would protect pensioner benefits until the next election. And I do have a concern if this is taken away from pensioners before the next election, that would be against our manifesto.
So what would you do? Would you actually ask the BBC to reconsider this? Would you bring the policy, that area of policy, back into government?
I will look at that as and when I become Prime Minister, but I'm just stating my position that I am not comfortable with the way things have ended up, because I feel that there is a contradiction with our manifesto promise.
But you did write a letter to the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee saying transferring the funding of TV licences for those aged 75 and over and the World Service from the government to the BBC were two of the options under consideration. So it must have emerged from your period as Culture Secretary.
Yes,
Why would
but
you write that otherwise?
when we transferred the funding over, the funding was there to maintain free TV licences for the rest of that Parliament.
Okay. Let's move on to your comments on Donald Trump earlier this week when he tweeted about Sadiq Khan. You said you agreed 150% with Donald Trump's criticism of Sadiq Khan on knife crime. You've kind of rode back on that, haven't you?
No, I couldn't have been clearer that I did not like his words. I said I wouldn't use them myself. I've been absolutely clear. I've got no time at all for the racist rants of Katie Hopkins. I'm married to an immigrant myself, and I've no time for that at all. But the criticism he was making, not for the first time, because he made it when he visited the UK a few weeks back. In fact, he was tweeting from his plane while I was waiting at the bottom of the steps to greet him when he arrived at Stansted Airport. The criticism he was making was of Sadiq Khan, who, as Mayor of London, has not done a good job in tackling knife crime, and I think has been focused too much on the politics and not enough on the delivery of the things that matter to Londoners.
But when you look at the murder rate in London compared to US cities, might it not have been a good idea for you to have pointed that out to Donald Trump?
Well, we have lots of discussions, lots of things to talk about to Donald Trump, apart from the relative crime rates in different countries. We were talking to him about the situation in Iran, Syria, Afghanistan. But the reason he got into a spat with Sadiq Khan is because Sadiq Khan wanted to boycott his visit.
Do you see Donald Trump as a reliable ally, as an individual, not representing the country, but as an individual?
As Prime Minister or as Foreign Secretary, you have to look at the President of the United States as the person who is in charge of our most important ally. And whatever you disagree with, and there are plenty of things I disagree with Donald Trump on, but whatever you disagree with, you have to remember what he said, that this is the greatest alliance in history. And if you look at the D-Day celebrations, but actually if you look at the world we've had since D-Day over the last 75 years, it has been safer, more prosperous, richer, more diseases cured, less poverty than ever before in human history. And Britain and America are the two countries that have underpinned that global order. And that's why we are right to say it's an important alliance. We're right to make sure that whoever the president is, we work well with him or her. Donald Trump is a force of nature. I completely disagree with him on climate change. I completely disagree with his views on the NHS. And when I was health secretary, I went to battle with him on Twitter. In fact, my most popular tweet ever was one when I picked him up on something he said about the NHS. I don't think it's ever been bettered. So he doesn't mind if you disagree with him, as long as you tell him plainly. But I think it's also very important that we protect what's good about that relationship between Britain and America.
But you've just spent 90 seconds not answering my question. I asked you if you thought personally he was a reliable ally for this country, and you've done exactly what I said I didn't want you to do, to say, well, of course, America is our most trusted ally and all the rest of it. But as an individual,
so why did
can we trust him?
Why did I do that?
Because you're a diplomat.
Because this happens to be our most important ally. So when people try to draw me to say negative things about President Trump,
you could have just said yes.
Well, and then I would have been saying something which is not going to help further that relationship between Britain and America. And as Foreign Secretary,
but I asked you if you found him, you thought he was a reliable ally. You could have just said yes.
I could have said yes, and I was basically telling you that this is a man who has strengths and weaknesses, but I don't want to get drawn into the things that might be his weaknesses, because I want to strengthen our relationship, not weaken it.
Let's look at your record as Health Secretary. In 2015, you said we want 5,000 more GPs by 2020. How many have we got now?
Well, it looks to me like you've got the figure in front of you, and you're going to probably tell me that they've fallen since then.
No, I'm not. I'm going to tell you that in July 2018, which is the latest figures that I could find, there are 162 more. Now, that's, okay, it is more, but 3 years on from that target, you had only recruited an extra 162, when we know that the strains on the NHS mean that we do need, well, if not 5,000, probably more.
Well, GP recruitment was a particular difficulty, and the reason was actually not so much that we weren't getting new GPs to join the NHS, but because we've found a big increase in the number of GPs retiring in their 50s. But the overall figure is, compared to 5 years ago, there are 100,000 more employees in the NHS, and since 2010, most of that period I was Health Secretary, we've actually got an extra 16,000 doctors overall. But the problem for the NHS is that you might have 100,000 more people working in it. You've also got 100,000 more vacancies, because demand for the services in the NHS has actually been growing at a faster rate than we've been able to expand the NHS. How do you solve that? There's only one way. It is by training more doctors and nurses. Now, that takes 7 years. Or in the case of a nurse, 3 years. So I increased in 2016 doctor and nurse training places by some of the biggest increases in the history of the NHS. Doctor training places up by a quarter, nurse training places up by a quarter. And that is part of the long-term way that you can make sure the NHS is there to do what we want.
You've made great play in the leadership campaign of the fact that you didn't blink during the junior doctors dispute, and that you've used that as an example of how you can negotiate. But when you look at some of the other statistics, when you look at A&E waiting times, when you took over as Health Secretary at the end of 2012, 94.9% of people were seen within the 4-hour target period. By the time you left 6 years later, that figure had dropped to 84%. The number of patients waiting for more than 4 hours in A&E rose from just under 60,000 to over 190,000 when you left office. Now, that's a threefold tenure. You look at cancer waiting times, and I could go through all of the statistics I've got in front of me here. It's not a good record, and yet you are promoting yourself as somebody who's got an excellent record as Health Secretary.
Well, you can cut statistics any way you like, but let's just take the ones you've given me. In A&E, when I left as Health Secretary, we'd increased the number of people being treated within the 4-hour target every single day by 2,000 more patients.
That clearly wasn't enough, though, was it?
Well, that's my point, because demand was going up because of the ageing population. But when I left as Health Secretary, in every single disease category, you mentioned cancer, but you could have had strokes, heart attacks, every disease category, life expectancy was higher than when I arrived. But what was also happening at the same time as that was that there was a big increase in demand for services in the NHS, and doctors and nurses on the front line were under enormous pressure. And we need to get more resources in and to train more doctors and nurses. And that was why towards the end of my time, I negotiated that record increase in the NHS budget, extra £20 billion a year, the biggest single increase the NHS has ever had, in order to make sure the NHS could increase its capacity. And what I want people to know as Prime Minister is that, yes, like all Conservatives, I want to cut taxes, but I would be a Prime Minister who would make sure our public services are properly funded, because I think that is a vital part of our Conservative promise.
So essentially what you're saying is, look at the outcome figures, don't look at the waiting times. Maybe you were too over-ambitious in the waiting times. Am I reading that right?
What I'm saying is the things that really mattered, which is how many people survive different diseases, continued to improve, but we had pressures on the front line because of the sheer number of people using the service. And I made sure by the end of my time that we had the resources and we were training the extra doctors and nurses such that there would be a solution, a way through that. Although obviously Matt Hancock has now taken over as Health Secretary, he'll be able to see that through, I hope.
Do you think that, say we leave on October the 31st, do you think that is the time where you can say, we are now going to deliver on the £350 million a week promise, which you weren't part of the Leave campaign, and I mean, some Conservatives will say, well, we've actually already delivered on that, and we've actually delivered on 394 million. But do you want to commit to putting that kind of extra money in over the next few years?
Well, I think for the NHS, we looked at the money that was needed, and we did actually agree that it needed nearly 400 million more a week by 5 years' time, increasing gradually to that level. And I negotiated very hard because I believe that was what was needed. When we leave the EU, we will have some headroom, and I do want some of that headroom to go to public services. But my first port of call actually would be the social care system and the education system.
Before we go to the calls, a quick text here from Paul, going back to the TV licence issue. He says, on the BBC TV licence, MPs are entitled to claim the cost of a TV licence from the taxpayer. How is it fair to make the most vulnerable pay for it? Surely that must stop.
Well, I don't claim the cost of my TV licence, but
that was my next question.
But you will remember, Ian, that we had a very big scandal with MP expenses about 10 years ago.
We had Sir Ian Kennedy in here for an hour last night. So.
And the result of that is that because of the public outcry from LBC listeners and many other people, that the power to decide what MPs get for free on their expenses and what they don't was taken away from us. And there's now an independent body.
But do you think it's fair that MPs can claim this?
Well, I think if MPs have to have a second home because, you know, they live in the northeast of England and they have to have a flat in London as well as somewhere back home in the northeast, and they have extra expenses that are legitimate because of their work, and one of them might be having a TV.
How is having a TV a legitimate expense?
Well, you know, the media is a pretty important part of an MP's work, and you know, they have to watch. So it's
fair for a 90-year-old to pay a licence fee, and an MP can get it for free. Most people will think that just is not fair.
I think most people would say that if you have additional costs relating to your work, not a perk, but things you have to have because of your work, that is fair. But the truth is, this is not a
perk, isn't it? Because no MP is going to be in their flat during the day. They'll be working in the Commons, so they come back and watch a bit of Netflix.
Well, I don't think you'll find the Netflix is paid for by the taxpayer.
Now we've set our hair running, haven't we? Jerry Hunt, we will be talking to you. We'll get taking questions from our listeners in just a moment. 0345 6060 973. If you can't get through first time, do keep trying. You're listening to LBC. It's 8:31. Amelia Cox has the news headlines.
Four men now remain in the race to become the next Prime Minister. Rory Stewart has been eliminated after getting the fewest votes from his fellow Tory MPs in the latest ballot. A 64-year-old man's been arrested on suspicion of manslaughter by detectives investigating the death of Cardiff City's Emiliano Sala. The footballer died with the pilot of a plane as it crashed in the English Channel in January. A man's been found guilty of murdering a Britain's Got Talent finalist. Desmond Silver stabbed Simone Kerr in Battersea in southwest London in August. LBC weather, showers clearing over eastern and southeast England overnight. Light showers continuing in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. A low of 5 degrees.
This is LBC. Sheila Fogarty, Monday to Friday from 1 p.m.
I think the opposite, Colin. I think it will mobilise both sides enormously.
Well, I don't think.
Will you vote?
I don't know. It depends on how you.
I can't imagine why you wouldn't if you're this passionate about your position.
I know what's going to happen. There'll be 3 questions and they'll lower the voting age to 16.
What if there are 2 questions and it's the same age of voting? Will you vote? I can't imagine.
I already voted.
Sheila Fogarty.
With Blink Home security cameras, helping give your family peace of mind.
LBC.
This summer, Q is for quizzical comedy.
That's what you're getting, so you better enjoy it.
Quality craftsmanship.
It's bang on.
Quirky cars. Quite brilliant goals.
Superb goal!
Quarried treasures.
Big nuggets, here we come.
Quantifiably, quintessentially, quite simply, Quest. Now in our new home on Freeview Channel 12 and also available on Virgin, Freesat and Sky.
It's absolute magic.
Radio, playlists and podcasts.
There are thousands of great podcasts to choose from. Find your favourite.
Global Player. Download it from your App Store now.
At the AA, we're always trying to make your journey better. Our mechanics fix 8 out of 10 cars at the roadside, usually within 30 minutes of arriving. You could say we're simply the best. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong song. Join today from just £4.50 a month. Visit theaa.com. The AA, because anything can happen. New customers only. T's and C's apply.
In 1972, Swale Heating was born. Since then, we have sold thousands of boilers from top manufacturers like Worcester Bosch. This year, we will sell our 250,000th boiler for free. And you could be the lucky winner. Visit swaleheating.com. Rely on us to keep you warm.
Is your money working as hard as you do? Think about it. While you're grafting away, is your money working too? No? Then it's time to Wealthify. Wealthify is the smart, easy way to start investing. Just say how you want to invest. Cautious, adventurous, somewhere in between? And let Wealthify do the rest. Then keep track of your money on the app. Easy. Isn't it time for you to Wealthify? Download the app or visit wealthify.com. With investing, capital is at risk and you could get back less than you put in.
Clearance at John Lewis & Partners Oxford Street is now on. There are thousands of great offers from kitchen and homeware to fashion and beauty, as well as expert advice from our partners and a minimum 2-year guarantee on all our electricals. More of what you love for less. Clearance, now on.
Leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
25 to 9. If you've just tuned in, you can watch us. Jeremy Hunt is here. You can watch us on the LBC website, lbc.co.uk, our Facebook page or Twitter feed. Let's go straight to your calls. Howard is in Greenford. What would you like to ask, Howard?
Right. Good evening, Mr. Hunt.
Good evening, Howard.
I would like to ask you, do you know how many registered food banks we have in the United Kingdom?
I don't. You're going to tell me?
Well, I'm going to tell you, over 2,000. And do you know how many people actually use them?
Go on.
Over 1,200,000. So that's something to put in your, into your notebook. How would you, should you become Prime Minister, eradicate food banks?
Well, first of all, Howard, I want you to know that I am a Prime Minister who believes that we...
Not quite yet.
I would be... Thank you, Ian. I would be a Prime Minister.
Should you be Prime Minister?
Should I be Prime Minister? Thank you very much, Howard, and thank you very much, Ian. Should I be Prime Minister?
No, I never said you were going to be.
No, you didn't. I noticed that. I think that the issue of poverty in our society is something that we should take very, very seriously because we are all citizens of the same country, and some of the poverty that we have in our country is still very shocking. So what's the answer to that? I think there's 2 answers. First of all, you need a government that runs the economy in a way that creates good jobs, because in the end work is the best way out of poverty. This government has a good record on that. It's created about 1,000 jobs. Hang on, let me finish. You've got to let me finish.
Well, I will, but it's relevant to this. There are people in work who go to food banks. There are nurses, we understand, that go to food banks.
And I was just coming to that point. Thank you, Iain. We've created about 1,000 jobs every day, and that's the first bit. And then the second thing is you have to make sure that people are decently paid in work, which is why we introduced the national living wage, which means that the minimum people get paid has increased very dramatically. But we're not there yet. And the truth is that after the terrible financial recession of 2008, we had a lot of people who experienced really terrible poverty, and there's a lot of work to do. And I would hope that we can create a country where we don't have 1.2 million people using those food banks, Howard, for exactly the reason you say.
So you're Prime Minister for 5 years. What would you like? Obviously, you want to see poverty eradicated completely. But if there are 1.2 million users of food banks now, what would you like to see after 5 years?
Well, you can't possibly answer that question, Iain, because you don't know what the situation is going to be. But let me say this. I would like to be a country where we have dramatically fewer people using food banks because we have been able to increase the basic wages that every single person takes home.
But we see targets made for example, homeless people coming off the streets. Why can't we have targets for food bank use?
Well, I think food bank use is a symptom. What I want to see is everyone in this country able to earn a decent wage, and that depends on smart economic policies. I'll tell you what I think we need to do in that respect. Howard, I think this country with the top universities in Europe and more technology startups, we could be the world's next Silicon Valley, and that would create a lot of very well-paid jobs.
Okay.
And I think that would help.
Howard, quick comeback from you.
Well, very, very simply, this government has been nearly, I think it's about 8 years in power, and quite frankly, food banks have increased, so something is wrong somewhere.
Okay, Howard, thank you very much. Let's move on to Naomi, who's in Hendon. What's your question, please, Naomi?
Hi. As Health Secretary, you were the most hated Health Secretary in my memory. You demoralised and disenfranchised all junior doctors. Many of them have left medicine as a result of your changes. And directly because of this, there are significantly less GPs and people can't get doctor's appointments. NHS staff will not vote for you as Prime Minister. I do not want Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister. I want a Tory Prime Minister. You on the Tory ticket will lose all the NHS votes. People just won't vote because of this.
Do you work in the NHS?
Yes, I'm a GP and I'm a vice chair of one of the CCGs, and I see the difficulty. We are advertising for GPs all the time. Our staff, the people that are coming out of training as GPs now, are so miserable. None of them want to work as GPs. They want to work as locums. They don't want to be partners. They don't want to take clinical roles. I'm on hundreds of Facebook groups with doctors. All of them want to vote Tory. All of them don't like Jeremy Hunt for what you have done to the NHS. Please, can you consider this and pull out of this election? Because we need a Conservative Prime Minister. We need you to win the next election, and we cannot have someone who is so tainted with this track record, because you will not get the NHS vote.
Well, there's a challenge for you.
Right. Okay. Well, Naomi, first of all, thank you for putting the challenge to me. And I recognise that I was Health Secretary when there was a very bitter and divisive strike with the junior doctors, and I sincerely wish that we hadn't had to have that strike. When I arrived as Health Secretary, I had to deal with some truly appalling scandals. The scandals in Midstaffs, Morecambe Bay, Gosport, Southern Health, scandals where I met patients and patients' families where people had died truly horrible deaths. I remember meeting a father who lost his baby boy, a week old, at Morecambe Bay. He had to write over 400 letters and emails before the NHS told him the truth. And I decided that I was going to be the Health Secretary that listened to the voice of patients. And I had some big battles. But by the end, nearly 3 million more patients were using good or outstanding hospitals than at the start. And in terms of the number of people working in the NHS, we were up to, as I was saying earlier, 16,000 more doctors across the NHS than when we came into power in 2010. Now, I recognise there were battles along the way, but I always tried to do what was right for patients. And I also listened to people like you, Naomi, when you said that there weren't enough resources, there weren't enough doctors. And that was why, before I left, I secured the extra £20 billion a year for the NHS, one of the biggest increases. And I was hoping to do the same for social care, but I didn't end up staying around for long enough to do that. So I recognise that feelings are bruised, and I actually think the junior doctors do a fantastic job. But I hope people realise that I would be a Prime Minister who would not court popularity, but would always do the right thing. And I think the foundations in the NHS now are stronger, and I think that will help take the NHS forward.
Naomi?
So that might be absolutely right, and you might really believe in what you've done. The problem is you've had a battle with the NHS staff, who is the biggest employer in this country, as you know, and that staff won't vote for you. And we need a Tory government, and we need a Tory Prime Minister. If you are on the ticket, unfortunately, whatever you might say, we have got very, very bitter staff because of the changes you made. And yes, of course you did with the mid-staffs inquiry. And of course there are lots of different things. And I'm a GP in central London, and I have to deal with poorly performing NHS in various different roles of mine. The reality is that no one else changed the junior contract to such an extent that their rotas are unbearable. They're earning so that they can't get onto the property ladder. Nurses, doctors, etc. And they will be the ones that would have voted for you, would vote for any of your opponents, but won't vote for you.
Okay, Naomi, I just want to. I do need to come back to that, because the junior doctors' new contract actually put up their salary by 11%, which makes it easier for them to get bigger mortgages and afford homes. You have to let me finish. And we've ended up with more doctors and more nurses. And all I would say is that as a result of negotiating the extra funding that I did, we're able to train more doctors, train more nurses, and relieve those pressures that you're seeing every day as a GP. I don't pretend that I haven't had to fight big battles, but I think that any Prime Minister, the people of this country, want someone who is going to do the right thing and do what they believe is right, and isn't going to be saying, I'm just going to try and be like most politicians and be Mr. Popular, is actually prepared to take difficult decisions. And goodness me, with Brexit, we've got some difficult decisions on our plate, and I want to get on and solve them.
When you hear a call like that from Naomi, how does it make you feel? Because that must hurt when you hear things like that.
Well, it makes you understand the kind of politician you want to be. And I've always said that as a politician, you shouldn't judge yourself on whether you are popular in the short term. What you should judge yourself is what people are going to say about you in 5 years' time. And, your next guest, Michael Gove, who you're talking to, had equally big battles with the teaching profession. I'm sure you're going to be talking
I'm sure we will.
about that. But by the time he finished, there were 2 million more children in good or outstanding schools. And so I think both of us...
Come on, you don't want to promote him. He's your main rival.
No, I'm very happy to talk about the fact that in this respect we are very similar. And I do think it's important that you have reformers who want to change things.
All right, Naomi, thank you for your call. Darren is in Swansea. What would you like to ask Darren?
Ian, thank you, mate.
Hi.
And thank you for the comment earlier as well. We're not BBC. We are people off the street. You don't vet us. We just ring up and ask the questions. Jeremy, I'm just wondering... Rory Stewart put his neck out and said that he would ask Nigel Farage to come into maybe the negotiations and speak to Nigel Farage. I was wondering whether you would, because with Nigel's business acumen, with his years of experience within the EU, working within it, I was wondering whether you would possibly be willing to bring him into the negotiations.
Darren, can I ask you, are you a Brexit Party supporter by any chance?
I'm not a member, but I am a Brexit Party. I did vote for the Brexit Party. Yes, I'm not a member.
So it sounds to me like you're someone who wants us to get on and leave the EU as quickly as possible, and that's exactly what I want. And I want a Conservative government because I think Conservative government gives this country a strong economy and more prosperity for our people. The way that we will deal with what Nigel Farage is saying is to leave the EU. That is the only solution.
But wouldn't he help do that if you brought him into the negotiating team?
No, because I think that we don't have any Brexit Party MPs in the House of Commons. We've got Conservative MPs and DUP MPs, and they're the ones that we need to unite so that we can get a deal through.
But he might be a good advisor in these negotiations.
Well,
aren't you cutting your nose off to spite your face?
Yeah,
basically bringing him on board. I also feel that maybe a lot of Conservative members that you lost to the Brexit Party, if it came down to you and another single PM in the last running, in the last vote, if you were to bring him on board, and the Conservative members that actually went to the Brexit Party, you might actually get them on your side.
And you do need to get them back, don't you? If you want to win an election, you've got to get people who voted for the Brexit Party back into the Conservative fold.
The only way to deal with the threat from the Brexit Party is to Brexit. And that's what we have to do, and we have to do it as quickly as possible. Darren, I hear what you say. There is one very important difference between what Nigel Farage is advocating and what we as the Conservatives, or certainly what I am advocating as a potential Prime Minister. Nigel wants to leave the EU right away without a deal. I want to see if we can find a deal. If we can't get a deal, then I'll leave without a deal because we've got to leave. But I do want to make an effort to get a deal first. And so I'm going to have a go at that. And I think I can do that because just like you're talking about Nigel Farage, I'm a business person by background too. And I think I can negotiate that better deal.
Darren, thank you very much. Brenda is in St Ives in Cambridgeshire, not Cornwall. Hello, Brenda.
Oh, hello, Iain. Hello, Mr. Hunt.
Hi, Brenda.
Hello. The question I want to ask you, if you became Prime Minister, what priority would you give to the release of Nazarene Zaghari Ratcliffe, who now is on a 5-day hunger strike, plus her husband Richard, also on a 5-day hunger strike? This issue has just gone on far too long. This woman could die in Iran, and why, if you became Prime Minister, you don't repay the debt that you owe Iran, and they've taken her as a hostage because of that debt?
Well, Brenda, thank you for asking that question. Obviously, I'm Foreign Secretary at the moment, so I am responsible in the government for doing everything I can to try and get Nazanin home. And I met Richard Radcliffe, her husband, who's a very, very brave man, over the weekend. He told me about his hunger strike. I met him on many occasions. I flew to Tehran to meet the Iranian foreign minister and other bigwigs in the Iranian government to try and persuade them to let her home. The bottom line is that they're holding her hostage. She's completely innocent. She's got a beautiful daughter called Gabriella, who I met when I went to Tehran, 5 years old, who has been separated from her mum for nearly half her life. And I am doing everything I can. But you mentioned the money.
400 million, isn't
400 million or whatever it is. There's a court case going on. Britain is a country that pays its debts. We will do what we are asked to do by the courts. We'll have to do it in a way that is compliant with the sanctions on Iran, but we will do what we do. But we're not going to link the two issues, because if we link the two issues, then the next time a country wants to get some money out of Britain, they'll just take someone else hostage. And, my message to Iran through all of this has been, of course we can have disagreements as a country, and we've profoundly disagree with some of the things Iran is doing right at the moment. But don't make an innocent woman suffer for this. Don't take someone hostage who's absolutely nothing to do with this, and destroy her life because of a disagreement that you might have with the UK.
Is the problem that you've got the Iranian Foreign Secretary who you're dealing with, but actually he's not really the man who can make these decisions? It comes from, shall we say, some more conservative with a small c elements in the regime.
Well, that, Brenda, is part of the problem as well, because Iran is run by a supreme leader who's a religious figure, and the military and the judicial system all report to that religious leader, and they don't report to the civilian government, who are the people that we have contact with. And we've tried to meet people in the judicial system. I asked if I could meet them when I went to Tehran, and they wouldn't let me. So we have got to get Nazanin home, but actually we've also got to tell Iran this hostage-taking business has got to stop. This is not a way to operate in the world, just to lock people up. And Brenda, I want to just tell you something else, if I may. Nazanin's not the only one. She happens to have a very brave husband, and they've decided to go public. There are other people with equally heartbreaking stories in prisons in Iran today, and there are other people who aren't British. We're not the only country.
How many?
I'm afraid we don't publish those figures because we don't talk about these unless the families want us to. But because Richard Radcliffe has been brave, the whole world knows what Iran is getting up to.
This is going to be a horrible question to ask, but if Boris Johnson becomes Prime Minister, is the release of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe more likely, or would that hinder it?
I'm not going to answer that question. I've tried to answer every question tonight, Ian. I don't want to answer that question because I just think the worst possible thing in Nazanin's situation is if it became a kind of brickbat in a Conservative leadership campaign. I know that Boris wants to get Nazanin home every bit as much as I do, and I know that whoever is Prime Minister will do everything they can to get her home.
Brenda, thank you for your question. Let's go to James in Southgate. James, what would you like to ask Jeremy?
Hello, Jeremy.
Hi, James.
Question. If you were to become Prime Minister and you were in number 10, would you like to get more involved with China and bring in the goods in and more with the business of having business with Huawei? I can never pronounce Huawei,
yeah.
And getting them more involved with us and our technology. Would you like that? Being you're involved with Chinese.
James, can I ask, are you in the technology business, or do you?
No, I'm just interested because I love America, and I think they're our allies, and China has always proved to be our enemy in the past, and they've shown that they're our enemy as far as North Korea is concerned. North Korea is our ally, and China is North Korea's ally. So if we ever have any problems, it's I'd rather get worried if you really would like to have more of their products.
Jeremy.
Yes, well, it's probably one of the most important questions that's been asked this evening, James, because if you actually step back from all our angst over Brexit, the biggest change in the world that's happening has been this phenomenal rise of China. And my view is that it could be a tremendous force for good. This is a quarter of the world's population. They're being lifted out of poverty. We're buying their products, they're buying our products. And I hope it is a great force for good, and we certainly shouldn't seek to stop the rise of China. But sometimes it's difficult to read what direction China is going in, and they do some things that worry us. And we've had some cyber attacks that have come from China, for example, and these things worry us. So I think we have to have our eyes open. And when it comes to our national security and our 5G infrastructure, on our phones, we all look at these 4G signs now, but we're moving to the next one, which is 5G. And what we've got to make sure is that when we put that infrastructure in place, we are not dependent on any other country in a way that threatens national security. So I think we've got to be cautious on those decisions. The government, of which I'm a part, is in the middle of making that decision. They haven't made that decision. It wouldn't be...
Which way do you lean?
Well, I lean on the side of whatever we do, doing it with our eyes fully open.
Well, that's motherhood and apple pie speak, isn't it?
Well,
I mean, you either want to let Huawei into 5G or you don't.
Well, the government hasn't made the decision. I'm part of the government, and that's why I have to, be careful about what I say. But I do think that we've got to be careful. No, I think I'm giving a pretty clear
in 4 weeks' time, you might be Prime Minister.
Yeah.
I think we have a right to know which way you lean on this.
Well, I think I've been very clear to James on this, that we should not put ourselves in a situation where we're technologically dependent on another country.
Do you not think that we are entirely craven in our attitude to China? I haven't heard many responses from the British government on what's going on in Hong Kong at the moment, for example.
Well, then you haven't been reading my tweets, Ian, and I'll forgive you for that, but I've very clearly called for the chief executive of Hong Kong to stop this progress towards this extradition law.
Do we have government by Twitter now? Is that what we're reduced to?
Well, we put out a statement as well, but people seem to read the tweets more, unfortunately. And we said we're very worried that this planned law is in contravention of an agreement that the UK signed with China back in 1984 called the Joint Declaration. So, no, we when there are things we disagree with that China does, we say so.
And do you ring up your Chinese counterpart and say, look, mate, this is a bit out of order, what are you going to do? Or in words to that effect?
Yeah, words to that effect, perhaps more than those exact words.
Your Excellency.
Yeah. No, I know the Chinese Foreign Minister very well, and I met him on a number of occasions. Can
you form with somebody like the Chinese Foreign Minister, can you form the kind of relationships that you can with Western foreign ministers, where you can build very good personal relationships?
It takes longer. There's more protocol, there's more formality. It's very unusual to have a one-on-one conversation. There are usually conversations where there are lots of people around. But, what I would say to James's question is, whichever direction China goes, it's important for us to keep talking to them and try and avoid misunderstandings. And that's certainly what I do.
We've got lots more calls. We could go on for another hour, but Michael Gove might be very unhappy with both of us if we did that. Jeremy Hunt, thank you very much indeed for joining us on LBC.
Thank you, Ian.
Well, coming up in the next hour, we will be joined by the Environment Secretary, Michael Gove.